Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we are tracking a monumental shift happening right in front of us in the global economy. Today, we're unpacking the expanding BRICS alliance. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus a rapidly growing roster of new members. For decades, the entire global financial system has basically revolved around the United States and the US dollar. But right now, this growing coalition has a massive, unprecedented ambition. They want to challenge that US-centric economy and create an entirely separate system of global trade and finance.
So that brings us to the billion, or honestly, maybe the trillion-dollar question. Could a new alliance actually dethrone the US dollar? That is the incredibly high-stakes reality we're dealing with in this explainer. We're talking about the potential to build a completely independent economic island, operating entirely outside the traditional rules and control of Western powers. If you've ever wondered what happens when major global players just decide they don't want to play by the established rules anymore, well, here we go. This isn't just abstract geopolitics. This is literally about the underlying architecture of global wealth. Can they realistically build an alternative financial system? Let's find out.
To really get why this is accelerating right now, think about it like you work for a highly successful company. The pay is good, the benefits are great, but suddenly management becomes completely unpredictable. Every few months, you get a new boss with entirely different rules. One day, you're offered a promotion, and the next, you're threatened with getting fired and hit with heavy penalties if you so much as look at another job board. That is exactly how many nations, even those that have historically aligned with the West, are starting to view the US-led financial system. Between unpredictable tariffs, sudden sanctions, and constantly shifting foreign policies, these countries are simply seeking stability. Like any stressed employee, they're looking for alternatives.
And we absolutely cannot underestimate the sheer scale of their ambition here. I mean, just think about this number, 50. Collectively, the nations making up the BRICS alliance right now control nearly 50% of the entire world's population. Just let that sink in for a second. Half the globe. Alongside that immense demographic weight, they also command a huge share of the world's vital resources and a rapidly growing slice of global trade. By the numbers alone, the internal capacity of this group is absolutely staggering. Honestly, it kind of makes you wonder why they haven't already reshaped the whole global order.
Well, let's trace the timeline and see how this builds, because this ambition certainly didn't just materialize overnight. BRICS actually started way back in 2006 as just a really loose chat on the sidelines of the UN. Then in 2009, they held their first official summit, which frankly was mostly a symbolic photo op with some pretty hollow discussions. But then we hit 2014. That was the major turning point where they graduated from a symbolic gesture to an organization with real, solidifying objectives by founding the New Development Bank. And now, in 2024, they are experiencing a massive expansion. They're organizing, they're evolving, and they are getting very serious. So who is actually part of this 2024 expansion roster? We've got Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and recently Indonesia. That is a dramatic increase in both their geographic and economic footprint. Now, interestingly, Argentina was initially slated to join this list too, but a change in their government administration resulted in the new leadership taking a chainsaw to that plan. But hey, even without Argentina, this rapidly growing list of nations shows a clear collective hunger for a brand new global system. To understand how they actually plan to build this system, we really have to talk about the NDB, the New Development Bank, which they set up in 2014. Now, this isn't just another corporate bank. It's intended to serve as a direct alternative to Western-led institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. This represents their very first major tangible step toward building that self-sufficient geopolitical island we talked about earlier. It's basically the financial engine meant to operate completely outside the control of traditional US dollar banking systems. Okay, so we've seen the impressive numbers and we've seen the expanding roster. But the lingering question is, can BRICS actually execute this massive ambition? It's one thing to have the population and the resources. It is a whole different ballgame to seamlessly coordinate the economies of a dozen vastly different nations. Achieving this level of independence isn't exactly a walk in the park. As our source points out, it requires a tremendous amount of sacrifice and structural alignment from every single member. So let's step back and do an institutional reality check here. A really great way to understand the hurdle they're facing is to compare BRICS directly with the European Union. See, the EU has a highly developed institutional framework. They have a European Commission, a parliament, a court of justice. Basically, they have supranational authority, meaning they can actually make, interpret, and enforce binding laws over their member states. BRICS, totally different story. Even with the New Development Bank, BRICS remains a very loose association. They completely lack any supranational authority to enforce rules or keep the group in line. And that brings us to a crucial point, captured perfectly in this quote from the source. None of these member states and their respective leaders are really going to be that excited about giving up their often unchecked power. Without binding rules or central governing body, the entire alliance operates on a really fragile trust. If one major BRICS player decides to just give the others the diplomatic middle finger and act entirely in their own self-interest, the rest of the alliance has absolutely no mechanism to reprimand them. There's no way to force compliance, and that makes unified action incredibly difficult. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Look no further than China and India, the two economic monoliths of the group, to see what happens without a central authority keeping everyone aligned. They have deeply conflicting visions for global investment. China is funneling massive amounts of money into Africa and Asia through its sweeping Belt and Road initiative. Meanwhile, India is aggressively pushing its Asia Growth Corridor in partnership with Japan, which is a direct rival initiative. They are essentially competing for the exact same regional dominance, and that severely stunts the cohesion of the whole BRICS alliance. But those conflicting visions, that is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to internal rivalries. India runs a massively lopsided trade deficit with China. The two are constantly battling for influence over exactly where the new development bank allocates its projects. Throw in some unresolved territorial border disputes, and India outright refusing to join China's infrastructure initiatives over debt and sovereignty concerns, well, you get the picture. The fundamental distrust between these two absolute heavyweights makes building a unified, frictionless alternative to US-centric banking nearly impossible right now. And don't think for a second that these internal fractures are limited just to the founding members in Asia. No, the disunity extends right into the new expansion class. Take Egypt and Ethiopia. Both joined the bloc seeking economic independence, yet they are currently locked in a fierce, escalating dispute over Ethiopia's construction of the Renaissance Dam upstream along the Nile River. This isn't just a mild diplomatic disagreement, guys. The Egyptian government has sent numerous threats, and the source notes the consequences here could be literally explosive. It's pretty tough to share a unified currency with a nation you're actively threatening. But despite all these immense hurdles and roadblocks, we really can't ignore the progress that is being made. And that's highlighted perfectly by the number 25. Some incredibly deep, symbiotic relationships are forming within the bloc. For instance, Brazil is now supplying 25% of all of China's agricultural imports, specifically crucial crops like soybeans and corn. That is a foundational shift that is slowly but surely weaning their reliance off of U.S. agriculture. So while political unity is definitely a struggle, the economic interconnectedness between certain members is absolutely strengthening.
However, pulling away entirely is still a massive tall order, mostly because of lingering Western dependencies. Right now, most BRICS members simply cannot afford to sever their ties with the West. For Brazil, the U.S. is still its second largest trading partner, providing a vital lifeline of foreign direct investment in tech, real estate, and manufacturing. India meticulously balances its military by sourcing equipment from both East and the West. And globally, there is still a heavy historical reliance on European and American brokers for international banking and maritime shipping. They are all still deeply entangled in the old system. But here is where the dynamic gets truly fascinating. The U.S. government has recently started issuing aggressive theatrical threats, including the possibility of 100% tariffs on any BRICS nation that adopts a new default currency, complete with counter tariffs for any retaliation. Now, while this might seem like a show of strength to keep dissidents in line, our source points out a pretty incredible irony. This kind of heavy pressure and unpredictability from the West is exactly the catalyst that accelerates BRICS cooperation. Threats of financial lockdowns only prove to these nations that they absolutely need an alternative.
So when you piece all of this together, the huge ambitions, the internal conflicts, and those deep Western dependencies, you arrive at the most realistic definition of what BRICS is actually becoming. It's an economic insurance policy. The ultimate goal for these nations likely isn't total isolation from the West. Instead, it's about creating a strategic safety net. They want to continue trading freely with the entire world, but they want to retain the self-sufficiency to survive if they're ever targeted by severe sanctions or financial lockdowns. Basically, it's the ultimate geopolitical backup plan. Which leaves us with this final lingering thought to consider. Will BRICS ever actually overcome its internal distrust and lack of institutional structure to become a truly unified global superpower? Or, because of the harsh realities of global trade, is it destined to remain just a really powerful geopolitical backup plan? It's a delicate balancing act of ambition versus reality, and watching how these nations navigate it is going to define the economic landscape of the next century. Thank you so much for focusing your learning with me today. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.